Let me tell y'all something. There comes a time in this world where the tables turn, and they don't just turn a little, they flip over, crash down, and shatter every old rule that once existed. And that's exactly what just happened. Burkina Faso, a nation that thought it could hold its ground, that thought it could keep on walking tall with the backing of a few global bullies, just found itself kneeling before the very country it used to underestimate. India. Yeah, that's right. Folded, straight up folded. After trying to play tough on the world stage, after trying to talk loud with no depth, after letting itself be used like a pawn in somebody else's game, it ended up standing face to face with a power that don't blink, don't bend, and don't back down no more. See, you got to understand how we got here. This ain't about just one move. This is a long game India's been playing. While other countries were out here barking orders, tossing around sanctions like candy and acting like they still run in the colonial world, India was working quietly, strategically, peacefully, but powerfully. It ain't showing off in every headline, but you better believe it's showing up in every decision that matters. India was building relationships where others were burning bridges. It was bringing solar power where others were bringing death traps. It was delivering rice, medicine, and respect, not missiles and manipulation. And for countries like Burkina Faso, that was a choice. A choice between true partnership and fake promises. But they didn't choose wisely at first. You ever watch somebody talk themselves into a corner like they keep running their mouth until they realize, oops, now they actually got to back that up. That's exactly what happened to Burkina Faso. They let themselves get pulled into the global narrative. They joined hands with those who wore suits but walked with shackles in their back pockets. They thought the old alliances still held value. They forgot this is 2025, not 1925, and the world don't revolve around Europe or America no more. The compass has shifted and the needle it's pointing east. It's pointing to New Delhi. Now, I ain't saying Burkina Faso was evil. No, but they were blind. They didn't see the wave that was coming. They thought by siding with the traditional powers, they'd get protection. They thought if they barked at India, they'd get rewards. They thought if they ignored the Buraises call, if they pushed back on Indian outreach, if they stood with the West during key UN votes, they'd earn points. But instead, they earned isolation, embarrassment, and eventually silence from the very nations they counted on. Meanwhile, India kept climbing economically, militarily, diplomatically, building satellites while others built sanctions, sending vaccines while others sent threats. You see the difference. The world saw it too. The breaking point came not from a missile, not from a war, not from a dramatic invasion. No, sir, it came from dignity. It came from something the West forgot to teach, humility and long-term loyalty. India didn't need to yell. It didn't need to throw shade. All it had to do was show the receipts, show the growth, show the respect. And slowly, country after country started lining up, quietly at first, then publicly, and then proudly. Burkina Faso watched as its neighbors got deals, got infrastructure, got energy security, not just loans. It watched as African nations got listened to, not lectured. And when the cameras stopped rolling, when the applause faded, and when the real decisions had to be made, that's when Burkina Faso realized they were on the wrong side of history. Their pride was loud, but India's results were louder. Their alliances were shallow, but India's friendships were deep. And so they folded, not out of fear, but out of realization. They folded because the mask had slipped. The truth was clear. And the future didn't belong to the one who shouted. It belonged to the one who delivered. You know what's crazy? This whole scenario ain't just about Burkina Faso. It's about a pattern repeating all over the world. It's a story of what happens when underestimated power becomes undeniable. When patience becomes power. When a nation stops trying to please others and starts playing its own game. That's India right now. They ain't just showing up to global tables. They're building their own. And let me tell you something. People want to sit at those tables not just because of trade or technology, but because of how India moves. With respect, with vision, with a sense of legacy rooted not in war but in wisdom. Burkina Faso's pivot to India ain't weakness. It's awakening. It's the sound of the old order collapsing and a new one rising. A world where influence ain't about who speaks English the loudest, but who understands the needs of the people. A world where your strength ain't measured by the size of your military, but the size of your impact. And India got impact like never before. Whether it's in Africa, Southeast Asia, Latin America, or the Middle East, Countries are watching, learning, shifting. Because India ain't just rising, it's redefining what power looks like. But here's the real kicker. India didn't have to colonize anyone to get there. Didn't have to exploit, manipulate, or dominate. All it had to do was be authentic, be consistent, be strategic. And when Burkina Faso came knocking on that door again, this time with humility instead of hostility, India didn't slam the door. Nah, India welcomed them. Because that's what real power does. It don't hold grudges. It holds standards. And it gives second chances. But it never forgets who believed in it and who didn't. Now, let me break this down for the folks still doubting. Imagine you at a poker table. Everyone's laughing at the quiet guy in the corner. He don't raise. He don't bluff. He just plays his hand, calm, patient, and then boom, royal flush. That's what just happened. India was that quiet guy and Burkina Faso. That was the loud player who thought noise equals strategy. But when the cards were down, they were the first to realize the game was already lost. This moment is going to echo. Trust me, other countries are watching this. They're taking notes. Because what Burkina Faso did, that surrender, that shift, it ain't weakness. It's a signal. A signal that a new era has arrived. One where countries no longer have to pick sides based on old alliances, but on who actually delivers. And India, oh, it delivers. With satellites, not soldiers. With trade, not traps. With respect, not regimes. This is why so many of the big powers are panicking. They see their grip slipping. They see the headlines changing. India signs deal with X nation. India expands solar power in Y region. India launches humanitarian aid to Z continent. And every time that happens, the old empires feel a little less relevant because their playbook is outdated. But India's writing a whole new script. And guess what? Everyone wants a role in that story now. Burkina Faso, by folding, just gave the world permission to shift. They broke the fear barrier. They showed that even if you once picked the wrong side, you can still walk toward the future. If you got the courage. And India just proved again that it ain't going to gloat. It ain't going to mock. It's going to build. Together. Side by side. Because the real flex, it ain't in revenge. It's in rising so high they can't even see you in the rear view mirror no more. You know what this all really comes down to? Timing. See, for decades, India was kept on the sidelines. The world saw it as the back office, good at code, cheap labor, yoga, curry, culture, but not leadership. But that was just the surface. Underneath, a giant was stretching, waking up, remembering who it was. Not just a country, a civilization, a force. And now that giant's walking steady, tall and unbothered. Burkina Faso's fall wasn't their end, it was their beginning, a second chance to walk with power instead of puppets. And the world, it better take notice. 'Cause if India can shift the mindset of a country that once resisted it, just by being consistent, respectful, and excellent, then baby, imagine what comes next. India is not just playing the game, it's changing the game, and one by one the world is folding to that reality, not out of fear, but out of faith. Faith in a new kind of leadership, one that don't need to dominate, just demonstrate. That's what just happened with Burkina Faso. That's the moment we're in, a world shocked, a continent shifting, and a nation, India, standing taller than ever, not because it demanded the world to kneel, but because it earned the world's respect. And respect, my friend, is a currency more valuable than gold. Certainly. Here's your full speech transcript compiled into one continuous flow, with all timestamps and breaks removed just as you prefer, keeping the original English intact. And when they did, they found India was still there, still offering, still waiting. India had become a paradox for the old world order. A nation that had once been dismissed as chaotic, poor, and overpopulated was now setting standards in digital governance, space technology, and pandemic management. While Western countries were hoarding vaccines, India was shipping them. While others were cutting aid, India was expanding lines of credit. And this wasn't charity. It was strategy, a strategy rooted in soft power, moral leadership, and long-term alignment with the aspirations of the global South. Burkina Faso saw that, and once they stripped away the propaganda, what they saw was a nation that wasn't trying to dominate the 21st century, but to redefine it. This recognition was not easy. There was resistance. There were reactions from African leadership, diplomats trained in the West who still clung to the old playbook. There were trade officials hesitant to upset relationships with France or the EU. There were even media outlets that framed any turn toward India as reckless deviation. But the numbers didn't lie. Nations that aligned with India were experiencing growth in sectors that matter renewables, logistics, digital infrastructure, education. Countries that bet on India were diversifying trade, reducing dependence on extractive partners, and joining multilateral platforms like BRICS+ and the International Solar Alliance. India wasn't just inviting others into its orbit. It was helping them build their own. That's not domination. That's leadership. Burkina Faso's youth understood this faster than its elite. For years they had looked up to the West because they were told that was where success came from. But now their favorite apps were being developed in Bangalore. Their coding classes were taught via partnerships with Indian universities. Their healthcare models were inspired by India's massive rural outreach. Even their music scenes and cinema tastes were shifting eastward. This cultural connection paved the way for a deeper political and economic realization that India wasn't a distant dream. It was a relatable reality, a country that had lifted hundreds of millions out of poverty without losing its soul, a country that had modernized without abandoning tradition, a country that could sit across from America and China and not blink. When Burkina Faso's leaders finally decided to reverse course, it wasn't out of desperation. It was out of deliberation. They had options. They could have doubled down on their old alliances. They could have tried to play both sides. But instead, they chose clarity. They chose to stop posturing and start partnering. And they didn't just send envoys to New Delhi. They sent a message to the world. We see where the future is headed, and we are no longer afraid to walk toward it. This act of turning toward India was in many ways a turning toward themselves, toward dignity, toward self-determination, because aligning with India wasn't just about trade or technology. It was about values, about sovereignty, about building a world order that wasn't based on intimidation but invitation. And India, for all its complexity and contradictions, had extended that invitation with open arms. Burkina Faso's reversal lit a spark. Countries that were quietly skeptical about their own Western dependencies began to speak louder. Regional coalitions in Africa, once fragmented, started talking about an India first approach to development cooperation. Think tanks began publishing papers not on how to balance India and China, but on how to deepen engagement with India on its own terms. The tide wasn't just turning. It was flooding old paradigms, and through it all, India remained steady. It didn't brag about Burkina Faso's change of heart. It didn't issue press statements gloating over its win, because India understood that true leadership doesn't come from humiliation. It comes from inspiration. It knew that Burkina Faso's decision wasn't about weakness. It was about wisdom, about knowing when to pivot, about choosing partnership over pride, about betting on a future that wasn't manufactured in corporate boardrooms, but forged in the fires of collective struggle and shared growth. India didn't lecture Burkina Faso on their past choices. It welcomed their present one. It didn't extract promises. It offered presence. And presence, especially in a world addicted to transactional diplomacy, is rare. It's powerful. It's what makes nations shift not just policy but philosophy. And that's what Burkina Faso did. It didn't just shift alliances, it shifted mindsets. This recognition of India as the future of global leadership didn't come with a red carpet or a global summit. It came quietly, in the boardrooms of Ouagadougou, in the conversations of professors and students, in the corridors of ministries. What happened with Burkina Faso is not just a regional shift. It is a microcosm of a larger tectonic movement in global consciousness. In a world disillusioned by transactional diplomacy, surveillance capitalism, and neo-colonial arrangements dressed as partnerships, India has quietly emerged as a beacon, not by shouting the loudest, but by standing the longest. And that endurance, that quiet confidence, has become magnetic. Nations weary of exploitation, tired of dependency, and fatigued by being pawns in great power games have started to see in India not just an alternative, but a mirror, a reflection of their own aspirations, struggles, and dignity. What makes India's rise distinct is that it doesn't demand fealty, it inspires cooperation. It does not seek to replace Western dominance with Eastern dominance. It seeks to replace domination itself with partnership. India's approach is civilizational, not transactional. It extends history, culture, technology, and spiritual depth as a foundation for trust, not as tools of leverage. Burkina Faso's realignment is significant not because it chose India over someone else, but because it finally chose on its own terms. It marked a generational shift from dependency to dignity, from scripted alignments to sovereign decisions. For decades, nations like Burkina Faso were told who to trust, what to believe, how to vote, what to accept as truth. But now, in India, they see a partner who listens more than it dictates, who shows by doing rather than demanding by default. And it's not just about diplomatic visits or trade agreements. India's influence is organic. It flows through fiber optic cables carrying telemedicine. It pulses in the beat of Afro, Indian fusion music emerging in urban youth centers. It rides on the solar energy partnerships powering rural schools. It is seen in the call centers, coding camps, rural health programs, fintech innovations, and cinema, all subtly rewiring how the global South sees power and possibility. This is not a geopolitical alliance based on fear or debt. This is a cultural and economic handshake rooted in mutual upliftment. And it's not forced. That's the beauty of it. It spreads because it resonates. India never promised Burkina Faso a utopia. It promised respect. It never painted over the challenges. It offered tools to overcome them. In a world obsessed with imposing models, India has mastered the art of offering frameworks adaptable to local needs. Its success lies in its flexibility, in understanding that one size doesn't fit all. India does not preach sovereignty, it enables it. That alone marks a seismic shift in the vocabulary of international relations. And that shift is spreading quietly, irresistibly from capital to capital, from village to village, from institution to institution. The global South is not waiting for validation anymore. It's building its own. And as this current gathers momentum, those still stuck in the paradigms of the past, of coercion, conditionality, and condescension, are beginning to lose relevance. They cannot understand how India moves without marching, influences without invading, builds without branding. They're confused because India does not seek to dominate headlines. It seeks to redefine the future in deeds. And that is far more enduring. Burkina Faso's pivot, then, is not a break from the West. It is a rebirth of self. A return to a world where alliances are chosen, not coerced. Where leadership is earned, not inherited. Where influence is a product of presence, not pressure. India didn't impose its hand, it opened it. And that gesture, so rare, so patient, so persistent, has changed more than one country's path. It has begun to rewrite the story of the century. And in that story, India is not the empire. It is the enabler. It is not the torchbearer of old hierarchies. It is the architect of new harmonies. A nation that remembers its past not with bitterness but with purpose. A civilization that never sought to conquer others, but always knew how to conquer hardship. India is not rising because it is loud. It is rising because it is trusted. This is not just about Burkina Faso. It is about what comes next. The dominoes have begun to fall, not from pressure, but from awakening. Nations are watching. Youth across continents are asking new questions. Leaders once boxed into binaries are seeing a third path. And that path has an ancient name with a modern soul, India. Because in the end, the future will not be shaped by those who shout the loudest, but by those who build the longest. And India, with quiet conviction and timeless depth, is building a world that finally feels human again. A world where sovereignty is sacred, where partnership is honest, and where leadership does not mean standing above, but standing with. The world is watching, and the future is walking east.